Today's program, part of our ongoing program relating to humanism, titled Tales from the Bible Belt, An Atheist Stranger in a Strange Religious Land, is presented by Herb Silverman. Herb is the founder and president emeritus of the Secular Coalition for America, founder of the Secular Humanists of the Low Country in Charleston, South Carolina, and founder and former advisor to the College of Charleston Student Atheist Humanist Alliance. He has written for the Washington Post, Huffington Post, The Humanist, and more. After an 8-year legal battle, Herb won a unanimous decision in South Carolina's Supreme Court, nullifying the state's religious test requirement to hold public office. Please welcome Herb Silverman.
Thank you for that nice introduction. Now, later I'll talk about my recent book, An Atheist Stranger in a Strange Religious Land, which, as Buzz said, it's a compilation of some of my writings from the Huffington Post, Washington Post, The Humanist, Free Inquiry, Free Thought Today, and other publications. But first, I'll talk about my book, Candidate Without a Prayer, an autobiography that describes my journey from Orthodox Jew growing up in Philadelphia to apathetic atheist to accidental activist atheist when I moved to South Carolina, and now to what some might describe as an evangelical atheist. I'll begin with the X-rated part of my talk. I know, I was a lot cuter then. Many years later, on a tour of Israel, I was barred from several holy sites because of my attire. But one church said I only needed to have my knees covered. So I pulled my shorts below my knees and said, "Is this all right?" And to my surprise, it was. That's just one example of how religions can sometimes mindlessly follow rules that make no sense. And now for the G-rated part of my talk. I grew up in a Jewish neighborhood, went to a high school with mostly Jews, and hardly ever saw or talked to Gentiles. But when I was 17, I heard that a charismatic Christian speaker was coming to Philadelphia, named Billy Graham. I went to hear him, and like many others, I had a life-changing experience. After Billy Graham spoke, he encouraged people to come forward and be saved. I didn't even know what that meant, but out of curiosity, I came forward. Billy Graham mumbled a few words, and each of us who was saved was given a pastor to talk to. Mine asked, "Do you accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior?" And I said, "No." He tried fire and brimstone, but that also failed. When he found out I was Jewish, he brought over a converted Jewish pastor to talk to me. When I learned that his parents were deceased, I asked him how he felt knowing that his loving parents were rotting in hell. He told me they weren't. So I brought Pastor 1 back and watched Pastor 1 and Pastor 2 arguing about Pastor 2's dead parents. I realized for the first time how much fun it could be talking to religious people. And that was my life-changing experience. My first teaching job was at Clark University in Worcester, Massachusetts in 1968. It was during the Vietnam War. in one protest, a number of us were arrested for blocking the draft board. And I spent a brief time in jail where I shared a cell with one of my math students. He asked me for math help. And we were let out of jail just about the time he finished his homework. So, for me, going to jail was a lot like holding office hours. Unfortunately, our actions did not stop the war. But I did make one important civil rights contribution around that time. When a PhD student of mine passed her qualifying exams, I took her to a local Worcester bar to celebrate. But the bartender told me that the bar was for males only and that we would have to leave. The following day, I brought an African-American woman to that bar. And the bartender was obviously more uncomfortable being viewed as a racist than a sexist, so he consulted with his manager, and they served us. On the third day, I brought back my female graduate student, and they also served us. And from that day forward, this Worcester bar admitted women. It feels so nice being applauded for drinking. I moved to South Carolina in 1976 to teach at the College of Charleston. It was my first trip below the Mason-Dixon line, a bit of a culture shock for me, and, I think, for South Carolina as well. In my book, I describe my experiences with some of the racism and sexism I saw and how things are slowly changing. I like to engage with progressive religious people who do good works, and I had a wonderful opportunity in 1988. I admire former President Jimmy Carter, so I spent a week working at Habitat for Humanity in Atlanta with Jimmy Carter. There he is, and there I am behind him when I had dark hair. I didn't realize just how Christian Habitat for Humanity was. Its founder, Millard Fuller, led us in daily prayers to Jesus before breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I suggested to Fuller that he could get more participants if he were inclusive, since all of us were building houses for people. Fuller told me he wasn't. He was building houses for Jesus and would stop if he thought that Jesus didn't care. I much preferred Jimmy Carter's viewpoint. We would have dinner nightly at different African-American churches. One time I walked in with Jimmy Carter, and there was a standing ovation. So I whispered in Jimmy's ear, "I hope you don't mind. This happens to me wherever I go." After teaching at the College of Charleston for 14 years, I had gotten pretty used to living in South Carolina. But I underwent a major life change in 1990 when a colleague pointed out that our South Carolina Constitution prohibits atheists from becoming governor. Well, I knew the U.S. Constitution prohibited religious tests for public office, so I went to the ACLU, and a lawyer there told me that an atheist would have to mount a legal challenge by running for governor. And he said that the very best candidate would be me. Well, I looked around and didn't see much competition, so after giving it some thought, I agreed to be the candidate without a prayer. After filing for candidacy, I learned that atheist is a very provocative word, and not just in South Carolina. The Associated Press picked up the story, and the following day, I got a call from a very distressed woman in Philadelphia. I had to admit that the Philadelphia Inquirer was not the best way for my mother to find out that her only child was a candidate for governor and an atheist. I never expected all that publicity, so I thought I could spare my mother such heartache. She didn't so much mind my being an atheist. The problem for her was going public about it. She always wanted me to appear respectable, but that never quite happened. Meanwhile, Governor Campbell said that our South Carolina Constitution was fine as it was because our country was founded on godly principles. I was invited onto a number of radio talk shows where some of the callers would say, "As an atheist, I suppose you feel free to go out and rape and murder and do whatever you think you can get away with." My response to such callers was, with an attitude like that, I hope that you continue to believe in a God. I soon realized that I didn't just want to change our state constitution, I also wanted to change the hearts and minds of some of my fellow South Carolinians. The media would usually introduce me as a so-called atheist or an admitted atheist. I sometimes ask the host if they ever introduce their guest as a so-called Southern Baptist or an admitted Catholic. Now, Republican Governor Campbell knew he would have an easy re-election victory, so he refused to debate the other candidates. But I participated in a number of three-way debates with candidates from the Democratic Party and the American Party. That's the old George Wallace racist party. In a statewide debate on public television, my friends thought that I had won, but I expect friends of the other candidates thought that they had won the debate as well. But a year later, there was an objective way to determine the winner. Of the three participants in that debate, I was the only one who was not in jail. The American Party candidate was in jail for driving without a license and refusing to get one because it's none of the government's business. The Democratic Party candidate for more traditional reasons, tax evasion. During the campaign, I heard stereotypical comments that atheists are mean and angry protesters who do nothing but ridicule religion. I wanted to show that we do have a sense of humor, so here are some of the questions I was asked during my campaign and my answers to them. What would be the first thing you would do if you were elected governor? Demand a recount. What would make you believe in God? Perhaps if I won the election. It would take that kind of a miracle. What will happen to you when you die? I know exactly what's going to happen to me. I'm going to medical school. Just like my Jewish mother always wanted me to do. I expect to use my body parts to their fullest when I'm alive, but I hope others can make good use of them when I die. I did have my day in court, but the judge decided that my case was not ripe. In other words, he would only rule on its merits if I won the election. Well, to the surprise of no one, I lost. But I'm an optimistic kind of guy, and I always look for positives in the situation. The best for me personally was that I met Sharon, who's right out there, and she became my one and only groupie. We actually met in church. It was the Unitarian church, the only church that invited me to speak during my campaign. When I lost the election, I blamed Sharon because she had become my campaign manager. Now, that sounds like something that Donald Trump would say, except he'd expect people to believe it. So, with politics now in my blood, what to do next? I decided to fulfill my lifelong dream of becoming a notary public, someone who stamps documents. Actually, I learned in 1991 that the South Carolina Constitution prohibited atheists from serving in any public office, and notary public would be the easiest one to challenge. So I filled out the form, crossed out "So help me God," and submitted my application. But Governor Campbell rejected it. When I asked why, he said it would be too burdensome to explain why all notary public applications were rejected. But in a deposition in 1994, we learned that there had been 33,471 notary public applications approved in South Carolina, and that mine was the only one rejected. As far as I know, I'm the only one in the history of South Carolina to be rejected as a notary public. Then I won my case in several lower courts, but the state kept appealing it up to the South Carolina Supreme Court. And then finally, in 1997, the Supreme Court ruled unanimously in my favor, nullifying the anti-atheist clause in the South Carolina Constitution. I went to the county clerk's office with Sharon to pick up my notary certificate. And Sharon took pictures of the clerk handing me my license and of me holding it above my head in triumph. Now, I don't know what your definition of a loser is, but the others in the county clerk's office who knew nothing of my case had quite a chuckle, thinking that becoming a notary public was the high point of this guy's life. One of my students at the College of Charleston, who was unfamiliar with my case, saw the notary certificate prominently displayed in my office and asked me if I had to go to law school to become a notary public. I told him, no, it wasn't quite that simple. Law school would have taken only 3 years. It took me longer to get my notary certificate than my PhD in mathematics. My right to become a notary public should not have taken 8 years or happened the way it did, but it was well worth the wait. Incidentally, not only will I sign copies of my book, I'll also notarize it. And afterward, it's in the back there. Throughout all my endeavors, Sharon has been a wonderful friend and partner. So, after living in sin for 10 years, Sharon and I got married in our home on January 1st, 2000 at 12:01 a.m. Sharon wanted me to get dressed up for the wedding, so she got me a tuxedo T-shirt for the occasion. I had never told my mother about anyone I ever dated, but I figured it was about time. So I brought Sharon home to meet Mom. Even though Sharon wasn't Jewish, my mother was relieved to find that someone actually liked me. When I told an Orthodox aunt about my getting married, she just had one question: is she Jewish? When the aunt got the dreaded answer, Sharon Frata Pietro is not Jewish, this aunt refused to even meet her. Now, don't feel sorry for us, like we were in our 50s and that we just felt sorry for the aunt and thought how ridiculous it is. But that happens in some Orthodox families for kids who marry in their 20s and are disowned essentially by the family. So that's the really sad kind of thing. When I told a liberal aunt that Sharon and I were both atheists, the aunt said, "Couldn't you marry a Jewish atheist?" During my run for governor, I got a considerable amount of hate mail, as you might expect. But I also heard from a surprising number of people who thought that they were the only atheist in South Carolina. So in 1994, I helped form a local group, the Secular Humanists of the Low Country, which has become a vibrant community with over 150 active members. Here's our organization's T-shirts, and the back of the shirt has my favorite pun. I also learned about several national atheist and humanist organizations, and I joined them all because they were involved with issues I supported. But each was doing its own thing and ignoring other like-minded organizations. I wanted to show our strengths in numbers and cooperate on issues that affect all secular Americans. So in 2002, I helped form the Secular Coalition for America, whose mission is to increase the visibility of and respect for non-theistic viewpoints and to protect and strengthen the secular character of our government. We formed as a political advocacy group to allow unlimited lobbying on behalf of secular Americans, finally giving atheists a voice in our nation's capital. We went from all volunteers to a dedicated staff of 8. Not quite what the religious right has, but it's a reasonable start. We now have 19 national member organizations, including the American Humanist Society, the American Ethical Union, Secular Student Alliance, Black Non-Believers, Ex-Muslims of North America. We cover the full spectrum of non-theistic viewpoints. And we hope to expand to 50 active state secular coalitions. And the Secular Coalition has recently partnered with the United Core of Reason, which encourages cooperation of non-theistic communities in all states. And I hope you'll get engaged with those here in Illinois. Now, the Secular Coalition can certainly use help from some committed activists like many of you. So please consider going to our website, secular.org, and sign up for our action alerts as well. As president of the Secular Coalition, I was invited to participate in a debate at Oxford University in England. We were told to wear tuxedos, which I rented and wore for the one and only time in my life. The debate topic was, does American religion undermine American values? I began, you just heard Richard Lowry, editor of National Review, complain about how difficult it is to be a conservative in New York City. Now, I'll tell you what it's like to be an atheist in South Carolina. And I relayed some of my stories there. And I closed with, in this melting pot called America, we are one nation under the Constitution, or maybe under Canada. But we are not one nation under God. Given how the religious right opposes the teaching of evolution or any scientific or social view that conflicts with a literal interpretation of the Bible, we are really becoming one nation undereducated. Our side won. I also enjoyed debates with ministers, which is often the first opportunity for Christians to hear an atheist point of view from an atheist, rather than from their minister. One such debate was on, can we be moral without God? There were over 800 in the audience, mostly from the minister's megachurch. During the debate, we got to question each other. My favorite question for the minister was, how would you behave differently if you stopped believing in God? The minister thought for a minute and said, sometimes I'm tempted by other women, but I don't act on that temptation because of my love of Jesus, knowing how much it would hurt Jesus. Well, that gave me an easy response. Sometimes I'm tempted by other women, but don't act on it because of my love of Sharon, knowing how much it would hurt Sharon. I think even the minister's wife preferred my answer. Whether to base decisions on the needs of an imaginary God or on real human beings is the essential difference between conservative religionists and humanists. Now, I always look for common ground with religious people, even if it's difficult, as in the following case. Now, I know you're thinking, what could I possibly have in common with Jerry Falwell? Well, Jerry Falwell once said, God doesn't hear the prayers of a Jew. I agree with Jerry Falwell. Though, of course, for very different reasons. Here's my website for more information, herbsilverman.com, which includes some of my debates and writings. Again, I'll be happy to sign and notarize this book, as well as my recent book, An Atheist Stranger in a Strange Religious Land. I'll now give a few excerpts from this latest book. And if you'd like, you can brighten the lights a little. Okay. Now, this first piece from The Atheist Stranger is about one of my more interesting experiences as a college professor. Atheists are often accused of being militant because we passionately promote separation of religion and government. For instance, when the College of Charleston purchased a church building with a cross on top, I told President Alex Sanders that he should remove the plus sign from what had become a public building. Sanders eventually did, but not before describing our encounter in the Charleston Post and Courier, saying, I will just assign the building to Dr. Silverman as his office. A cross at the top and Herb Silverman at the bottom would be an equalizing force. I told Professor Silverman that if he kept quiet about the cross, he would not be nailed to it. Now, I wasn't offended by Sanders' humor, but the community was outraged that I referred to the cross as a plus sign. Angry writers complained about my offending Christians, though nobody seemed concerned by Sanders' remark about my being nailed to the cross. Next, I make a case for a title I would really like, Pope Herb. Now, hear me out. The Catholic Church can look especially foolish when it makes up different rationales for its positions. For instance, it used to accept the wisdom of St. Bonaventure that since only the male was made in the image of God, only the male can receive the godlike office of priest. After such claims became embarrassing, even to the church, the story became only males can hold positions of leadership because all the apostles were male. Since all the apostles were Jews, most of whom were married, I'm more qualified to be Pope than celibate Gentiles. My first act as Pope would be to declare ex cathedra, invoking papal infallibility, that all future popes must be atheists, turning Catholicism into an evidence-based religion. Now about my mathematics career. I have a connection to someone who was once the most famous mathematician in this country, Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. I never met Ted, but he and I were in the same mathematics research field, and I published articles with his dissertation advisor. When Kaczynski was caught, a slightly paranoid mathematics colleague became concerned that there might be an anti-mathematician backlash. It helped that most people find mathematicians guilty of nothing more than eccentric behavior. Mathematics and morality don't always go together, and, as we all know, neither do religion and morality. There are hardly any mathematicians or atheists in prison. The overwhelming majority of prisoners in this country identify as Christian. Now, here's something that might upset some of you liberals out there. 5 reasons I might join the Ku Klux Klan. Groucho Marx quipped, "I don't want to belong to any club that would have me as a member. I'm thinking of joining a club that I thought would never have me. A Ku Klux Klan chapter is now accepting Jews. Why would I even consider joining? First, I like diversity. Only one Klan chapter opened its membership to Jews, but that's a start. Reason number 2, my wife Sharon wants me to get some new clothes. I'd acquire the traditional Klan costume of a white robe and hood, but I'd still wear an atheist or humanist T-shirt on my robe and a Jewish skull cap on top of my hood. Next, I would finally learn my color. I'm confused when Klansmen say their organization is for whites only, not for blacks or Jews. I get that black is black, but what color is Jew? And what color was Jesus, a Jew they worship? And another reason, I could have lively dinner parties. It'd be fun trying to recruit my Jewish friends into the Klan. Since most are also atheists, I suggest becoming for a humanistic Judaism chapter of the Klan. And finally, Springtime for Klansmen. The Producers by Mel Brooks features the song Springtime for Hitler. I hope we're approaching a time, though recent tragedies might say otherwise, that we can best combat the Klan and neo-Nazis with humor. Speaking of humor, here are a couple of my favorite jokes about Jewish atheists. A Jewish atheist hears that the best school in town happens to be Catholic, so he enrolls his son. Things are going well until one day the boy comes home and says, "I just learned all about the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost." The boy's father is barely able to control his rage. He grabs his son by the shoulders and says, "Now, Joey, listen carefully, because this is very important. There is only one God, and we don't believe in him." Then there was a journalist from the Jerusalem Post who lived in an apartment overlooking the Western Wall. After several weeks, he realized that whenever he looked at the wall, he saw the same old Jew praying vigorously. Sensing a story, the journalist said to the old man, "You pray at the wall every day. What are you praying for?" The old Jew said, "In the morning, I pray for world peace. in the afternoon for the brotherhood of man, in the evening for the eradication of illness and disease from the earth. The journalist asked, "And how long have you been doing this?" "Every day for 27 years. Amazed, the journalist asked how it felt to pray every day for these things. The old Jew replied, "How does it feel? It feels like I'm talking to a wall." Next, I defend religious freedom for Christians. An affordable health care plan found in Mark 16 is that believers can cast out demons and will remain healthy by taking up snakes or drinking poison. Kentucky pastor Jamie Coots, a reality TV star on snake salvation, died after refusing treatment for a bite during a service. To paraphrase Matthew 26, "He who lives by the snake dies by the snake." I side with religious freedom for snake handlers who practice their religion without imposing it on those of us who live in the real world. Poisonous snakes are more effective in reducing overpopulation than in healing. What I admire, sort of, about Coots is that he was no hypocrite. He died for his beliefs. Contrast that with televangelists who ask poor people for love offerings, financial or otherwise. Now, here's what I wrote about the Pledge of Allegiance. The words "under God" added to the pledge in 1954 did not mean much to me when I was 12. Like most students, I mindly recited the Pledge of Allegiance, and after public school, I attended Hebrew school where I mindlessly recited prayers. The altered pledge just made it seem more like my Hebrew prayers. Public schools train students to say the pledge whether they understand it or not, because daily regurgitation is supposedly patriotic. That strategy succeeds if patriotism means following orders of those in power. Here is how teachers can turn the pledge into a more meaningful exercise. Have each student write a short essay on a segment. For example, "I pledge allegiance." What does it mean to pledge, and what is allegiance? To the flag. Why to a flag? Should it be to someone or something else? Under God. Are we all under God, under the same God, and so on? Next, have students read their essays, followed by a class discussion. Encourage each student to rewrite the pledge in a way that's more meaningful to him or her. Instead of a daily group recitation, the class can then discuss different student pledges. Students would understand the pledge better than in previous generations, whether under God or not. Sometimes it's easier to make a point with one pithy sentence. So I have a chapter on such sound bites. I'll close with a sample. "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was aardvark." Faith-based knowledge is like regular knowledge, but without the knowledge. Humans are just fish plus time. If God can't prove to me that he exists, what makes you think that you can? I believe in the Bible because I've seen one. Gods don't kill people. People with gods kill people. Life is a sexually transmitted disease with 100% mortality rate. It's well known that 87.3% of statistics are made up. Finally, some folks waste a lot of time and energy trying to interpret difficult, anachronistic, and contradictory biblical passages. So I'll make it easy for you and sum up both the Old and New Testaments in 5 words each. Old Testament, obey the Lord or die. New Testament, believe in Jesus or fry. Thank you.
Do you do TED Talks?
Well, if invited, I would be happy to do so.
Hi, thanks for your talk. That was great. I was reading something once where that said that there are a number of religious people who are secularist because they don't think the government would get religion right. And so I tell people when explaining secularism, I tell them that if you lived in Saudi Arabia or someplace like that, you might be a secularist. And I wondered if you had any thoughts on that idea.
Okay. Well, and when you talk about religious people, it depends on what kind of religious people they are. Like, for instance, a Harris survey showed that 52% of American Jews are humanists or atheists. They have no God belief. And a lot of people are secular, but as part of a community, work with their family and go to church regularly, and that because that's their community. And I think most people, I would hope, are for separation of church and state, which is kind of what our secular constitution's about as well, that there will be no religious tests. So even if people happen to believe in a deity, they can still promote a secular government, and that's where I think our efforts should be. Getting people to come out of the closet about who they are, so we won't be as demonized as we sometimes are. And if they're religious, still promote a secular government where we have freedom of religion, which must include freedom from religion as well.
Is there a difference between religion and faith? Or do you know if you could explain difference between religion and faith?
Well, both terms can be defined in multiple ways, and I know as humanists we tend to spend a lot of time parsing words on definitions, which I think can be fun. My emphasis is on if we all are interested in the same causes, let's work together on those causes. But in turn, I had a debate with one Christian minister whose organization is called Reasonable Faith, which some of us view as an oxymoron. But there's different ideas, I think, about what you might consider faith. Like, I'm at this podium and I have the faith that the podium won't collapse on me because I have evidence from past experience. So blind faith without any evidence, I think, is problematic. And religion can be defined in many ways. Like the Secular Coalition I mentioned has 19 organizations. 3 of those organizations are religious organizations. I mentioned the American Ethical Union, the Humanist Society for Humanist Judaism, and Humanist Unitarians. So religion is defined differently for different people.
Thank you for the great talk. I just got my master's degree in middle grade education mathematics. You mentioned the Pledge of Allegiance. I've been kind of obvious in my class, not saying under God, saying the rest of the pledge pretty loud. I've got a couple students to ask me why. I'm not going to have them write essays on it, and you have any ideas how to do that with in a mathematics class?
Well, in a mathematics class, I would just maybe give the history of the pledge. First, it was written by Bellamy, who was a socialist minister, and he wanted, the reason he had to the flag was each country can have its own pledge. It's not America is better than any other country, and it was entirely secular. The under God part was put in the pledge during the McCarthy era to distinguish us from those godly communists. Maybe today, with the God-believing terrorists, we should get rid of it, or that would be an argument for getting rid of it. So a discussion on the pledge, I don't see, well, it depends on the grade level and your school district. That potentially could be problematic, but instead of not saying eliminating under God, you might say under the Constitution, because if anything, that's what we should be pledging our allegiance to.
Hi, Herb.
Hey.
Could you tell us a little bit? I think you are involved with a group called the Center for Free Thought Equality and the Free Thought Equality PAC. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's, when I talk about our secular movement is growing, that's one of the greatest things we've had in the past year. The Free Thought Equality PAC, which was started with the American Humanist Association, they're looking for people who acknowledge being for free thought, some of whom have come out of the closet as humanists or atheists, and it's grown, it more than doubled within a few months. We don't yet have a majority, but it's kind of, people are becoming more and more comfortable coming out. Jared Huffman was the first, and he was thrilled about how many people supported him and are happy about it, and now he's gotten much more involved. He got an award at the Secular Coalition for America banquet, too, as a leader. So a lot of these people who are coming out are surprised about the support they have, and not much negative. Of course, at the moment, they're in more progressive districts. We also know some Republicans who are non-theists, and they're not yet ready to come out, but hopefully we can create a culture where it's okay. And the Free Thought Caucus has their own caucus. We also have a PAC that people can donate to for candidates who are with us on the issues, and mostly who have a chance to win. So I would not have received the PAC when I was running for governor. But I mean, the fact that people are willing to take money from a free thought group, I think, is a positive. There was a time when it would be mostly the opponent who would criticize them for taking money from an immoral group like humanists.
We have a question from above, just a balcony.
I'm a believer.
What do you say to people who say that this is a Christian country because it was founded by Christians on Christian ideals?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, in fact, I've been in those debates on that, and even a debate in our local paper where I mentioned we have a godless constitution, and I offered anyone $1,000 who could find the word God or Jesus in our Constitution. And some people would say, in the year of our Lord, which is just a title, but it doesn't mean anything. Some said, well, they meant Jesus in the Constitution, but they just didn't add it. I said, look, our founders were pretty bright people. If they wanted it to be a Christian nation, they would have said that. There have been proposed amendments to the Constitution that we should become a Christian nation. That all failed. So our founders saw what a Christian nation looked like in Europe, and they wanted to get away from those endless wars and formed a non-Christian country, meaning a secular country.
Just a note about secular, it doesn't necessarily mean that you believe in separation of church and state, which of course most do, but it's just that you don't look at God to solve your problems. You look at a secular government is one that looks at dealing with things in a rational manner, or supposedly, and a secular person the same way. Is the Freedom from Religion Foundation a member of your coalition?
Yes, they're one of the 19 national member organizations. And secular can actually mean two different things. For some people, it's saying secular, not religious. On the other hand, we work closely in lobbying with Americans United for Separation of Church and State, where the executive director had been the Reverend Barry Lynn. So he and the organization promotes a secular government, whether its members are religious or not. And that's fine with me and humanists and atheists. If people want to practice their religion, fine, but don't put it into our government and make laws making one religion getting special benefits compared to others, or religion in general getting benefits that secular people don't have.
Over here. Thank you for your talk. I had a question about what is your efforts in the free thought movement as separate from secularism or humanism or atheism?
I don't make a distinction. Like initially when we tried to form our coalition, people wanted to argue about words. What's better? Humanist, atheist, free thought. And I say, well, you know, we agree on 95% or more of the issues, and that's what we need to focus on rather than on what's the difference in our words and argue about that. Because I think of I accept all these words. I'm for free thought, I'm a humanist, atheist, secular humanist, agnostic, infidel, whatever. But we all don't believe in the same gods, so let's move forward and cooperate.
I'm curious to know, I don't know much about the Secular Coalition, and I wonder if you could highlight for us a few of the current pressing issues, the calls to action that you would ask the community to take up right now. What are especially maybe in front of the midterms, are there specific issues? Are there a couple of particular topics or races or pieces of legislation or things you would advise us to get active about? Okay.
Well, thanks for that question. Incidentally, there are brochures right out there for the Secular Coalition that talks about what we do, and often we hope to be more proactive, but we tend to be reactive based on what legislation is up, and we try to kill a lot of legislation. What we had recently been fighting about is the Johnson Amendment, which would give people an opportunity to donate to their church and have the money funneled to their political candidates. And that's like, without even, so they get a tax break, no restrictions on, and you don't find out who it is. This is like Citizens United on steroids. So that's been our more recent focus in lobbying on Congress about that. But if you just go to the Secular Coalition website, again, secular.org, you can see the current issues. And if you sign up for the action alerts, they don't harass you other than mention in your district what's coming up, and they write a sample letter that you could just send that way on why we are promoting a particular issue. And members of Congress listen. If like 30 people in their district are part of that, that can sway votes. So that's what we try to do. We started with the first lobbyists in D.C. Now other organizations secular organizations have lobbyists, like the AHA and American Atheists. And we're not competing anymore. The more the merrier.
Thanks, Herb. My question is, because you have been a leader of American Humanist Association for a couple of decades, at least you held the big positions. My question is historical. Your role in transforming American Humanist Association from a religion-based thing to non-religious based. Could you illustrate a little bit details? I have no knowledge of that stuff.
Yeah. When I first joined the AHA board, it was classified as a religious organization. There were still humanist atheists, but there were tax advantages and being a religious organization. They didn't have the kind of audits you have. There would be breaks for owning property. And I didn't like the fact that the AHA was doing this, considering themselves a religion. And I brought that up. We had several more people who were concerned. Then we got a new executive director, Roy Speckhart, who agreed, and now we are not a religious organization, though we do have secular celebrants who are under a religious component of that. But I would rather see our country not give any tax advantages to religious nonprofits that secular nonprofits don't have. And that's one of the issues within our secular coalition.
Mine is a personal question. How old were you when you started to question the beliefs you were being taught growing up in an Orthodox Jewish family? And what was the crack that let the light in?
Okay, well, early on, I would ask questions like, who created God? And I never got any satisfactory answers. One rabbi, though, when reading Talmud, said, why do we refer to God of Abraham, God of Jacob, and God of Esau, instead of just a more simple God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? And the answer was, each of us must search for and find our own God. I took that seriously, and my search led to a God who didn't exist. But, it was kind of a gradual process. And I didn't know I was an atheist until I read Bertrand Russell's Why I Am Not a Christian. And I said, that's what I am. And before that, I thought, like atheists, communists, it's kind of the same thing. And I didn't really tell people at the time that I didn't believe in God. I was not an activist when I was about 12. I was still bar mitzvahed in Orthodox synagogue, and it was then about rituals and pleasing family. But I never thought God is watching my bar mitzvah and blessing it. So probably around the age of 12, and later I became a more open atheist. Though it was not a big deal to me. Like when I lived in Massachusetts at a liberal university in the 1970s, and they never talked about religion. It seemed like the default was being an atheist. It was only when I moved to South Carolina, and the first thing they ask is, what church do you go to? And that's especially difficult when, if you have young kids, where some parents won't let their kids play with the atheists. Kids. But then it became a civil rights issue, especially when I found out that they actually do discriminate in our state constitution. So I still hope more people find reasons to come out and be active.
Are there any more questions? Yeah, over here.
Why did you choose to move from the more liberal climate of Massachusetts to the much more conservative one of South Carolina.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, it was the job that took me there, but you're asking the same question that my wife Sharon asks. Like, why do you want to continue to live in South Carolina? There's some benefits, but she would rather live in a place like Massachusetts or California. And I said, you know, if we live in these kind of states, I don't feel like I'm very useful there, whereas in South Carolina, I can make a difference. So I urge some of you who are thinking, and some are maybe going to be retiring and wondering where to live, I would recommend you come to Charleston, which also is the #1 tourist place in the country, according to some magazines, or at least visit, and it'd be great to go to dinner with any of you if you'd be interested in coming down.
Hey, Herb, I'm to your left. Thanks. Hi.
Yes.
Thanks for your talk. So I feel like I think you're talking to like-minded people, and we are all probably big fans of your advocacy and your humor and all of those things. Can you help, let's be a moment, turn it around and say, what makes us easy to hate? How do we behave now in our own real lives as atheists and as secular people what are the things we do that make it kind of embarrassing? Like, when are you embarrassed about our tribe? And what do other leaders, and whether it's atheists or humanists or whatever activists, when did you say, well, that was a bridge too far, that's counterproductive, that's rhetoric that doesn't help, or that's alienating? When do we need to kind of guard our own selves?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good question. First of all, I'd rather talk to fundamentalist Christians than to you people. Mostly because there's not a lot I can do. But, you know, I struggle with the same sort of thing and how to talk to people. Mostly I want to show that we shouldn't be stereotyped. We're very different. What I like when I talk to Christians who are kind of angry Christians, especially if there's an audience, some Christians will come up and apologize about the minister. And I say, I understand all Christians aren't that way, nor are all atheists that way. There are good and bad atheists, good and bad humanists. So measure people by their actions, not by their professed religious beliefs. So I think we promote our movement best by how we act and what we do to help people, and also mention, especially if somebody says that's a Christian thing to do, they say, well, not for me, I'm not a Christian. It's a humanist thing to do or an atheist thing to do, and try to engage respectfully with people without getting angry. We have a big tent, and I have to acknowledge there are atheists who do things that I don't like, and that's when I say, you know, we can disagree amongst ourselves, and I wish some people might tone it down. And there's sometimes a conflict. We all want some publicity. Some of us quiet people, and I think one of the problems I've seen within this organization, and I mentioned it at a workshop yesterday, is you do great things, but not that many people know about it. So I say, do great things, but publicize who you are and why you are doing these great things, so others can find out about it, and that can grow a movement.
Okay, we have one last question.
Who are your favorite 2 or 3 humanist authors?
I guess you don't want me to count myself. No, well, I mean, some of the people I know, it's hard to narrow down. Like, I've been on stage a couple times with Richard Dawkins, and even though he's somebody that some people are offended by because he's honest about what he thinks of fundamentalist Christians, but even he will say in a bus ad, there's probably no God, which is a less absolute statement than a lot of the Christians say. So I like him. I liked Christopher Hitchens' book, and just so many others that I'd hate to Sam Harris. These are all, by the way, were on the advisory board of the Secular Coalition. But I sometimes, in debates, hand out a reading list to people in the audience that has 10 or more books. And I could, if you're interested, I could email you my top 10 that I had. My email is founder@secular.org.
Okay, thank you, Herb.
Thank you.